Social justice. How could we have a just society when it comes to racism and interactions between races? How can we have a socially just society? Well, I can't say. I'm not allowed to say because of the color of my skin, which, by the way, is a racist thing to even for anyone to even think. But we're going to have on the show today Neil Mammen and Kevin McGary, two Christian men who don't have the same color of skin as I do, who have the right to tell you what is and isn't justice in our society. Of course, it's nonsense. Any human being made in the image of God has a right to analyze this issue and think it through clearly. So whatever your skin color, whatever your ethnicity, I don't really care. I don't really care at all. If you're made in the image of God, this video is for you. I'm Pastor Josh Barnes. This is Point of View, where we're unashamed to look at political, social, cultural, and theological issues from a biblical worldview. We do that because Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead, and he said the Bible is true. That means we can't be right about issues if we disagree with the Bible about them. That's the short version. I could give you the long version, but then that would be the whole show. So we're going to go into our interviews here. These are from our recent trip to the NRB convention in Orlando, Florida, and the interviews are conducted by Keith Sanders and Elsa Kurt. They are two other amazing hosts here at the Right America Media Network that brings Point of View to you as well. Let's get right to those interviews. We're going to start with Kevin McGary.
Welcome back to NRB in 2023 down here in the free state of Florida. I'm your host, Keith 2 Cent Sanders, and with me is Kevin McGary, author of Woked Up. Let's get right into it. You and I have been having a great conversation ahead of time. Yeah. Please, let's start with the basics. What is woke?
First of all, I want to say thank you, Keith, for having me here. It's a real honor and privilege for me to be here. What is woke? So this is a $1 million question that everybody's asking. In essence, what I like to do is not go into any kind of academic understanding of it because I don't want to lose anybody. Number one, so I'm not going to get into specific Marxist tenets or anything like that within wokeism. What I will mention is that in general, what it is people that identify as being woke are saying, "Look, I am sensitive to oppressive policies. I'm sensitive to racial disparities. I'm sensitive to LGBTQ issues." Basically, it connotes a sensitivity, a recognition, an acknowledgement of what's happening in culture.
And also, you and I talked about ahead of time, the idea that it is all disparities amongst different cultures are attributable to either the racism or the immutable characteristics. You would say that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely. So in essence, what you find with not only wokeism generally, but you'll find with CRT, you'll find with DEI, you'll find with social justice, all those, they're pointing to a particular type of individual, mostly those who lack melanin, like myself, are the culprits of oppression or oppressive acts or oppressive policies. And so immutable characteristics then become the number one criteria for deciding who's right and righteous and who's not. And that's
also the victim status, which is currency nowadays, why everyone is on some sort of a spectrum, whether it's the LGBTQ rainbow, which is a spectrum, or anything else you could possibly think of, because everybody has to have their piece of ground to stand on to say, I am a victim.
Absolutely.
Real quick, you wanted us to talk about it. I want to get it right out there. Talk to us about that shirt. What does it say? And talk to me about it.
So the shirt says, every black life matters. So here's the deal. When BLM were going and rampaging throughout all our communities a few years ago because of their grief and sorrow that they felt about what they saw with George Floyd for 9 minutes and 43 seconds, the reality is people had a lot of different emotions that came forward at that time. But mostly we saw lots of property damage, over $2 billion in property damage, over 26 law enforcement officers, and one stripe or another lost their life. All kinds of horrible things happened. And then we had pastors that said, look, we need our parishioners. Go out and with BLM. We thought, this is really bizarre. So my co-founder and I, Neil Mammen is co-founder of Every Black Life Matters. We said, why don't we come up with a righteous and faithful alternative? So righteous, faithful, moral people can at least have an alternative to the Marxist crazy, right? Because BLM, they said they're revolutionary Marxists, and we want it to be completely opposite of that and give people a safe place where they can come to and support an organization that's actually doing things within the black community and all communities to help unify people as opposed to tear them apart. So we started Every Black Life Matters as a righteous and faithful alternative to BLM. We actually are everything that they're not. So we stand for pro-life, from the womb to the tomb. from conception to the grave. All lives matter, every life matters. But we particularly mention every black life matters because we're bringing focus, we're illuminating a particular issue. When Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood, said, look, we want to thoroughly exterminate the Negro population, she didn't say we want to exterminate blacks and Hispanics or blacks and Asians. She said we want to exterminate blacks. And unfortunately, they've done a good job. Blacks are being born at this rate. All other ethnicities are being born at this rate. So what we're saying is, look, every black life matters too, T-O-O. So if you are an advocate for all lives matter and every life matters, we agree. Absolutely they do. Nobody, God is not a respecter of person. Therefore, because we all agree that all lives matter, we all need to unify in confronting the abortuaries and Planned Parenthood and says, stop targeting black genocide. Stop targeting the black community.
It sounds like you're more focusing on uplifting.
Yep.
Rather than continuing to keep people down through you are oppressed,
yep.
and here's all the ways that you're oppressed.
Oh,
is that fair?
Yeah, that doesn't empower anybody other than the Marxist crazy globalists who really want us to go there.
And you bring up abortion,
yep.
and I was actually talking with my teenage daughters about the idea of where are these abortion clinics. And we live in a nice neighborhood that is actually quite diverse because yep. we have good Americans that live near us. And we all look different, and we are all different, and we have a great community. I said, do you see any abortion clinics around here? And she said, no. I said, we have a high population of all different types of people, but you don't see an abortion clinic here. You see actual pregnancy emergency care. It was right near our neighborhood.
Yes.
I said, where do you see where do you see abortion clinics? And she said, in the poorer communities. And I said,
exactly.
Why do you think that is?
Right, exactly right. This is a purposeful strategy hatched by Margaret Sanger, who was a eugenicist. And so 90%, up to 90% of all Planned Parenthoods are located within walking distance of black and brown communities to this very day.
Because location.
Absolutely.
That's how all businesses are taken care of. You've touched on Marxism here a few times. You had a really great point on how that actually linked back all the way to Darwin. Let's continue that conversation and tell me how those all come together.
Yeah, so I wrote a book, Woked Up. So the book, what I really wanted to do is delve into the woke movement, really try to identify, is there any credence to their white supremacy and racist and all that? And so I said, look, let's do the research. So I wanted to start with Marx. And then I realized, well, I think if I start with Marx, because all wokesters would agree with socialist Marxists, I said, I may be missing something. So I started with Marx's protege. Marx and Engels, they dedicated their early works to Charles Darwin. So I started with Darwin and went to his first book, and it was on natural selection. The subtitle of that book was For the Preservation of Most Favored Races. And I'm thinking, wow, this is really bizarre. First time in human history where we have a scientific mind actually making dramatic distinction between races. Now, he was a renowned scientist, so people look and listen to Darwin.
To this day.
Yeah, to this day. The second book that he wrote, The Descent of Man, he went to a lot more detail. He actually characterized blacks as apes, savages, gorillas, and subhuman. Okay, so with Darwin's proclamation that blacks, he made the distinction. He says, look, we white European Caucasians, we've fully evolved, we plateaued. He says, but you could see my evolutionary theory. In fact, if you look at blacks, they're still subhuman. They're trying to climb the evolutionary scale, and they're right now they're characterized as gorillas, apes, and savages. And so when you think about that, that's white supremacy and racism being unleashed on a mass scale globally at one time from one individual. From that, Marx and Engels fully embraced all of the Darwin ideologies and put the pedal to the metal. So what they
so let's really nail that down.
Yeah.
Marx actually and absolutely based his theories off of these white supremacist and horribly racist pseudoscience ideas.
Absolutely.
And you have so many people from the left and the woke who want to say Marx, who never go just a half a step further. What is that based off of? Yeah. And they all are screaming what you're telling me is white supremacy.
Right. Marx was an avowed white supremacist by definition because he fully embraced Darwin. He wanted to dedicate his Marxist or his Communist Manifesto to Darwin. He said, but Darwin said, look, I don't delve enough in economic philosophy and that kind of thing. So he declined the dedication But there was a letter, and I have everything footnoted in the book, letter between the two, and they wanted to, because they said, look, you changed our lives. This is Marx and Engels. And so they fully imbibed all of the Darwinism, and then went further. So the other thing is that people have to understand about Marx is he had a son-in-law that was Cuban, dark-skinned Cuban, and he says, look, he used to say to his daughter, why did you marry Negrillo,
Nice.
the gorilla? So he was horribly racist, and even before sex slavery was a thing, he pioneered it, because this is what he did. He had a live-in maid. He didn't pay her one plug nickel. She slaved over him and his entire family for over a decade. He had 7 children and a wife, and she was, but he gratuitously had sex with her. As a matter of fact, he fathered a child from her, with her, and so that's Marx. So if you want to fall in with Marx, guess what? You got to own it all.
And they never do. And there's a lot of folks who are also ignorant to it. And that doesn't mean stupid, just ignorant to it. And you coming on with us here and getting this out in the open is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how all of this has influenced where we are today. DEI is absolutely everywhere. Talk to me about how folks are actually being impacted by this. And we know what it's based off of, but what is it really doing to folks?
Yeah, so DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, so I think any prudent business person or a small group leader would want diverse ideas at the table to solve problems, to get to look at issues. Ideas. So diversity can be a strength, but when you put the E in there, the equity piece, that's the issue. So diversity and inclusion, fine. We could be more intentional about trying to grow groups and environments that are diverse and inclusive.
Yep.
But when you throw equity in, now the way it's being practiced today, equity advocates, when they get into the DEI position, they're using the equity piece to say, look, blacks deserve to be represented every area of this organization. If you don't have them in the boardroom, whether they're competent or not, whether they know anything about the industry, whether they know anything about the certifications for the industry, whether they have any education, we need to have a black representative in the room. And management layers, we need to go ahead and fire the whites. Still, everything's based on immutable characteristics like skin color. Let's get rid of our white, all the whites in place, and let's put black people, whether they are competent or not. So here's the problem. This is undignified. It's undignified for the organization that would embrace such a crazy, preposterous notion, but it's undignified for the person, because now they're known as a diversity hire.
Now they have to go through that while they're at work. Are people looking at them saying, did they get that position because of their immutable characteristics? And you put those people in a bad spot.
Put them in a bad spot.
Well, you put them in a
situation.
And
as a black man, I know. I mean, this is
yes. And you put people in a position that they shouldn't be in.
Right.
That's unfair, that they're not being treated differently. However, people are professional, and they are human beings, and they are kind, and they do their best, I believe, to say, I'm not going to treat somebody like they got that position because they didn't deserve it, and I'm going to try to do my best to include. I really want to hit that equity word one more time, though. There's so many people who use it interchangeably with equality.
No.
And we're Americans. We love equality. Let's get more equality. Let's do all the equality we can. They use it interchangeably with equity, but then it then becomes insidious upon folks that they don't realize that folks are getting for no reason other than what they look like or how they identify.
Exactly
and
right.
that is not fair, I believe, on either side. And then they go one step further to say, well, representation matters. But representation mattering only goes one direction.
That's right.
You
That's
never
exactly
see anybody being pulled out in favor of somebody else in a different scenario. Talk to me about the destructive nature, a little bit more about equity.
Yes. So the way that this is actually being practiced, there's an actual strategy to it, an individual strategy. So if I, as an perpetually aggrieved, black person who always sees, these boogeymen of white folks who are infringing on our whatever it is, our freedoms or whatever it is, then if I become a DEI professional, I am going to look for opportunities to mete out retribution. So an individual DEI professional is a lot of this is being practiced where they're practicing retribution towards people because of immutable characteristics like skin color. The other thing that's being done, though, however, it's strategic. It's with the ESG and social credit scoring. What they're doing is they're encouraging DEI because what it's doing is it's socially conditioning us. So it's demoralizing us to the extent, because after we see all these people coming into the workplace that they're incompetent, they shouldn't be there, but okay, fine. And we're not going to say anything because we don't want to rock the boat. this is a form of demoralization. So Yuri Bizmanov actually did, he was an ex-KGB officer, and I document all this in my DEI and 3D book that's coming out here in June. But he says, look, these are practices and strategies for globalist communists to demoralize the American psyche. So when you are in that Great Reset, we've been socially conditioned for it.
Yeah, the social conditioning has been insidious, but now they seem loud and proud about it.
Yeah,
and if you do not conform to it, then you are the bigot.
Exactly.
And you are going to be ostracized, and you're going to be kept out. And so it's gotten to the point where it's almost you join or die.
Right. Exactly.
But not in the way that it once was. Right. And folks are being forced into these situations out of fear. And then if joining isn't enough, you then have to be loud and screaming at the next one to force them into it.
Yep.
We're short on time. I've really enjoyed this conversation, by the way. Let us know where we can find more about you and where folks can get this book.
Everyblm.com, everyblm.com. We actually do corporate trainings now for racial sensitivity.
Nice.
So we won't come in there as crazy Marxist ideologues, divide everybody up and have everybody aggrieved at the end of the day. So we do that. You can find out more information at everyblm.com. And the other thing that we do is DEI training as well. So we can get that off our website. But for the book, Woked Up, you can go to Amazon, just type in Woked Up, W-O-K-E-D, up. And it'll come up, and you can get the book in a couple days off of Amazon. That's the best way to do it.
Kevin, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Keith Sanders, for conducting that interview, and Kevin McGary for coming on the show. Next, we're going to Elsa Kurt and her interview with Neil Mammen.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to the show. I'm Elsa Kurt. We are here at the NRB convention, and my guest right now is Neil Mammen, and we're going to be talking about his foundation that he co-founded, which is Every Black Life Matters. And what you guys are doing is pretty incredible and completely contrary and different to what that other group is doing. Well, I don't even, we can't even call it a mission. Is it even a mission at this point? It's just
it was a mission to get a lot of money.
Yes, clearly. Money that I think still to this day hasn't been accounted for, right?
Or returned.
Or returned, yes. So let's talk about what a good foundation does and is doing. Tell everyone about Every Black Life Matters.
Yeah, well, so we started in 2020. Actually, it was my wife's idea. She looked at me and she said, hey, some of our Christian friends were going out and protesting with BLM. And she said, the problem is that they don't realize BLM is Marxist. But they want people to know they're not a racist. They're not a racist family. So she said, there needs to be an alternative, a Christian alternative, to express support with African Americans, but at the same time, not be Marxist and all the bad things. So she said, you should call up your buddy Kevin, my buddy Kevin, and I've known Kevin for many years. So I called Kevin up and I said, hey, Kevin, because he works with the Frederick Douglass Foundation and Douglass Leadership Institute. I said, you and the Douglass Leadership Institute needs to start this alternative to BLM. At least put something on your website, say we're the alternative, we're the Christian alternative. And he said, great idea. Calls back to the head office, and they're like, this is a great idea, Kevin, but we're too busy. You and Neil should start it. So Kevin calls me up. It's like that you go to the pastor and you say, we need a parking lot ministry. Pastor says, yeah, you're hired, right?
Yes, exactly.
So that's exactly what so Bishop Dean Nelson says, you and Neil are hired, right? Well, so Kevin calls me up and says, I guess we're starting it. I said, Kevin, I don't know if you've looked, but I'm not black. He said, no, but you are African American. You see, I was born in Ghana, and I grew up, in fact, until I was 13, I was in Africa and the Middle East, right? So I was born there, grew up there, Jamaica, Ethiopia, Sudan, Yemen, and my parents are of Indian ancestry. So we decided, okay, we got to start something, but we wanted it to be so similar in name to BLM, because that's what we're in the same lane.
Yes.
Because, there's lots of other good organizations like the Woodson Institute and all that. Great people, great man. But nobody thinks of them when they think of BLM.
Right.
So we said we got to use the same words, and so we thought about it, and we wanted all lives matter. Not all lives, all Black Lives Matter, or Black Lives Matter too. And we settled on Every Black Life Matter. And it's funny because the minute we hit upon it, we all knew that people listen to that and they go, yes. Because they know it's different from BLM, Black Lives Matter. Well, Every Black Life Matter. So that's how we started. And then we thought, okay, well, how do we then, we know we have a mission to spread the truth. Right. And the two missions here are to express the issue with the problems with black plight, because there is a black plight going on. I'll talk about that in a bit. But the second thing was to counter BLM. So we went down BLM's website and we found everything that they stood for. We said, well, yeah, We stand for the opposite of that, and that's exactly the problem with why blacks are in the position they are in. So they were against fatherhood and nuclear family. So we said nuclear family, active fatherhood. They were against educational choice. They wanted kids to be stuck in the public school system. We're like, hey, no, we're for school choice. And they're definitely not pro-life. And so the first thing we said, we're pro-life. So we are, we believe life matters from the womb to the tomb. So it became very apparent. And then, of course, they condone violence. So we're nonviolent. So this is how we start. But we do think that there needs to be a criminal justice reform. Because there are bad cops, and we want to separate the bad cops from the good cops. So this is how we started. But I want to go back to the story of black plight. The reason African Americans are in the plight they are in can be pointed. And I'm actually in the middle of writing a book called How to End Racism in America. And
instant bestseller right there, instant.
And I'm going to give you the answer. You don't need to buy the book. You'll have the answer right here. But I'll document the reasons behind it. So if you go back to the 1930s, at the height of racism in America, right, the African American family was actually doing quite well. If you walk down to any African American community, you would see fathers surrounded by their children playing. They would be playing in the yard, or they're playing with the kids. Or if you went downtown, you'd see fathers with a group of kids behind them. And if you walk down the streets and look through the windows in the evening, you would see fathers around the table praying. Now you go through the African American community, you see shuttered bars, you see nobody behind the doors, you don't see anybody outside because they're afraid to go outside. Why? Because something happened between the 1930s and the 1970s. If you go back to the 1930s, the literacy rate in the African American community was 70%. That means 70% of African Americans could read and write well enough to actually do business in English, right? So now let's fast forward to the 1970s. 1970s comes about, and no African American will ever vote for a Democrat. Why? Because the Republicans were the ones that got him out of slavery. Lyndon Johnson has a problem. He can't win the South without the African American vote. So he comes up with a plan, and he says, literally, we're going to have those ends voting for us for the next 200 years. And the plan is to make them completely dependent. And he's a racist, well-known fact that he was a racist. So he goes in and he says, I'm going to destroy the African-American family and make them dependent on the state. So, and we have, in fact, we're going to have an interview shortly with a lady who grew up in Chicago. And she said her mother would have the social worker come into her and say, look, if you get rid of your husband, I can get you double the amount of money in welfare per child.
Wow.
And then she said her aunt would actually get calls saying, throw that bum out. At least when I come there, hide his coat and his keys and his shoes so I can tell the state that there's no father in the home. So an active thing to move the fathers out of the house. What happens when you get fathers out of the house? You get kids, young girls who are looking for attention, male attention, they get sexually active. Young men cannot be handled, and their moms can't handle it. And what? They get involved in gangs and violence and drugs. So what happens when those gangs and violence and everything gets into the schools? You get bad grades. So bad grades, bad literacy. They're not teaching anything in schools. They're trying to. The kids are afraid of. The teachers are afraid of the kids.
Sure.
So African American literacy rate at the height of racism, 1930s, 70%. Today, you're lucky if it's 18%.
That is such an incredibly drastic difference that it's honestly shocking.
Fatherlessness rate in the 1930s, something like 20%, 21%. Today, 75%.
Right.
Okay?
I have read that, yes.
Right? Now add to that, and we'll bring in abortion shortly, but add to that now you have an active liberal group of people trying to raise the minimum wage. In the 1930s, African Americans were actually quite successful. Why? Because they would go into let's say that you were an owner of, not you, but let's say somebody was an owner of a business, and they were racist. The African American would come in and say, look, I know you have a construction business, but I will work for half the wage of the white man. Oh, I will do this clerical job for half the wage of a white woman. Guess what? If you're a racist owner, you're like, green is good.
Right.
I don't care if you're black. I want that
yeah.
money, right? So you want to hire them. A group of people called the KKK said this is not acceptable. And they came up with an idea for the minimum wage.
Wow.
1930s, minimum wage, around that 1938, I believe, minimum wage kicks in. Guess what the minimum wage is? It's the minimum wage that a white man wants for the job. So now you're a black young man who's willing to work. You go to a white racist owner. He goes, I can't hire you unless I pay you the full price. I don't like black people anyway. I'm not going to hire you. I'm going to buy a white man. literacy, employment goes down in the black community, and skills go down in the black. Before they were doing those skills back. In fact, 8 of the airplanes owned in some of the airports, there was a small, I think it was in Oklahoma, 8 of the airplanes were owned by black people.
Really?
Right? So you can see how that prosperity came back in the city. They don't like that. So now what you're doing is we have a minimum wage of $15 an hour. Who's going to hire a black kid who can read or write or can do inventory, can order stock or anything? Guess what? The effective minimum wage for black kids is 0 because they're not going to get that job. So you start looking at all these things, you realize that the problem is the government. As Ronald Reagan said, government is not the solution, government is the problem. And so we have a plan, and the book will talk about the plan. I'll give you some of the ideas. Well, first of all, you got to stop getting the fathers out of the home.
Yes, absolutely.
I hate government money, but sometimes government causes problems. You've got to move it out. And I can't say we can't stop giving black folks welfare which is the right solution to the problem, because it's not going to work. People will call you a racist. So I got a better plan. We want Congress to pass a law that says if you are the genetic father of a child in the home of a mother on welfare, you get more money.
Okay.
We're going to incentivize fatherhood.
Yes.
So now you come in, you go, hey, if I have a child, and if there are other kids, they're fine too. But if I'm at least the father of one of those children, we are going to get more money. The woman now has incentive to keep the man in the house. The man is now responsible for her income. So now things are changing. School educational choice. Again, I don't, somebody joked and asked me, says, do you think there should be prayer in public schools? And I said, well, to be honest, I don't think there should be prayer in public school. And they were shocked. Like, why don't you think there should be prayer in public school? I said, because I don't think there should be children in public school.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot.
But we can't get that done overnight.
Right.
So what we do is we need vouchers. Kids 80% of black parents want a voucher to take their kids out of those public schools.
Okay.
But who's not letting them do it? The unions and the left.
Right.
So that's racism. That's racism right there.
Absolutely.
How come you're not giving vouchers to the black kids? I mean, maybe you don't want to give them to the white kids. I think everybody should get, but at least you're a racist if you don't want to give them to the black kids. So that's one. Minimum wage has to go, right? So these are all the things that can fix this. And I'm telling you, within 20 years, there will be no racism. Why is there racism in America? The racism in America is because 53% of all homicides are done by 13%
Right.
of the population, which are black kids. So when you are a store owner and you see a black kid come in there, you're thinking, this guy fits the demographic of a violent criminal. Naturally, I'm going to be biased against him, right? It happens, and you see on the news all these black kids. So now you start putting fathers back in the home. Guess what? Now you don't associate blacks with crime.
Right. I love that you put that as the number one also, that you bring the fathers back into the home, incentivize all of that, because it is shocking when you lay it out like this. It is absolutely shocking to know and to realize that this is so orchestrated and calculated, and that should enrage people.
It should enrage everybody.
Yes, everybody, not just the black community. Everyone should be outraged and offended and disgusted by that, and doing, what you're doing. And now this book that you're writing, we need to know the release date. We need. I hope this will be out yesterday.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a short book because, as I said, I've summarized the argument. It's going to have all the documentation and all the recommendations there. But the reality is the fix is in our hands.
Right.
And then, of course, we got to address Planned Parenthood here.
Yes.
If you think about it, there are 44 million African Americans today. There would have been 64 million. 20 million.
Repeat that again. Say that again.
There are 44 million African Americans today.
Yeah.
There would have been 64 million.
Wow.
20 million, that's almost 50% of them have been killed before they were allowed to be born. Now, you talk about a genocide, a racist genocide of people. 80% of Planned Parenthoods are within walking distance or in black communities. Why?
Right.
Now people say, because they need those services. No. There are thousands of other places that will do
That's
it.
what the left will tell you.
Yeah. There are thousands of other places that will provide those services.
Yes.
Your services are killing black babies because you get $1,000 a baby if you can delay it to a late-term abortion.
Wow. Now tell me exactly what every Black Life Matters does in the way it's obviously advocacy, education.
Advocacy. We are very active in CRT, talking about how dangerous CRT is. We're very active in connecting Marx and Darwin, and so we've got a plan to try and flip the school boards. I mean, if you realize that Marx and Darwin were both utter racists,
Yes.
and yet most school curriculums don't mention that. So we want the schools to go in, and if a board member refuses to add that Marx and Darwin was a racist or pull their books and their materials from it, then the school board member is a racist, and then we're going to run somebody against you.
Nice, nice.
Right.
Well, I know this is an incredible uphill battle because the climate that we're living in right now is, it feels as if that they have taken over, that the left has taken over everything. But I think messages like yours and what you're doing, your foundation is doing, gives hope and inspiration. And really the biggest tool is education. And I love that you're doing that. Will you please tell everyone exactly what the website is that they can go to and how they can support?
So the two websites is everyblm.com. That's our website, and you can find a lot of information about us. We're actually also going to Nigeria. We're going to be training a bunch of Nigerian politicians because wokeness is coming there. So we teach against CRT and wokeness. So everyblm.com. And I wrote a book called Jesus is Involved in Politics.
Thank you.
Why
Yes.
aren't you? Why isn't
Yes.
your church? And that book actually talks about why Christians need to be involved, and you can go to jesusisinvolvedinpolitics.com. So jesusisinvolvedinpolitics.com. So those are the two websites that you can definitely
Beautiful. I love
support
that.
us.
And I hope everybody goes and educates themselves and do what they can to help and just be aware because this affects everyone. This is an everyone problem. And I thank you for what you're doing and your hard work and your passion. So thank you so
very
much.
much,
It was
Elsa.
wonderful meeting you
I
and talking
appreciate
to you.
it.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, folks. You can't disagree with Kevin McGary and Neil Mammen because of the color of their skin. You're not allowed to. See, that's how our system in America works. I'm Pastor Josh Barnes. That's all the time we have for today, guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time right here on Point of View.